Hey buddies, Mr. Pugly here, coming at you in another Wonderlands build. Today I want to showcase my amp spam build that's all about dealing lots and lots of damage by spamming amp shields, and this results in lots and lots of damage. Of course, we're going to be comboing with Blightcaller to allow us to get some shield shenanigans. Now this idea was actually suggested to me by a YouTube comment. I'm going to be showing it on the screen right now. He suggested me to try comboing this particular skill, Restore the Veil, with some amp shields and some other shenanigans as well, but I really thought that was such a great idea, so I went and rolled with it. And I was making this build around a week and a half ago, but I did get preoccupied since I did just get a puppy, so just been a little bit busier than normal. Nevertheless, the build is able to deal lots and lots of damage, as you guys saw at the beginning of the montage. But before we get into the meat and potatoes of the video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and follow me on Twitch on the top right. You have no idea how much helps me out. And let's get into the video.
Legendary? Whoa! No way, dude!
So first things first, as in tradition, let's go over the skill tree. Let's first go over the Blightcaller tree since he is most new. So that requires the most explanation. So first things first, we have Virulence, which allows us to get some status effect chance and duration. Now the important part is the chance, because we want to be able to proc a large dot on the targets, thus allowing us to deal lots and lots of damage with Spirit Swarm. Now Spirit Swarm will deal more damage if you apply a bigger damaging dot. So the higher chance that we get a big dot to happen, aka a higher status effect chance with Virulence, the higher damage Spirit Swarm is going to do. Now Spirit Swarm does actually have some synergies with this build besides just dealing damage, which I will go into in just a few moments. But next we have Geist in the Shell. Now you already know Geist Skulls are really strong, so I don't really need to explain that. Next we have Wraith Mail. Now ideally you would want 4 out of 3 on Wraith Mail, because the amp shield we are using gets rid of 25% of ward, so you can kind of spam it a little bit better if you get a class mod or an armor with 1 point into Wraith Mail. But I couldn't quite find it, but nevertheless it's fine. You want to max out Wraith Mail to allow you to spam your amps as much as possible. Next we have Flawless Edge. By nature of the build, we want to have our ward always full to allow us to get those amp shots, so putting 5 out of 5 on Flawless Edge just allows us to get pretty much a free 30% all damage dealt, which is awesome. This build has a lot of all damage dealt. I'll be honest, you probably don't even need 5 out of 5 on Flawless Edge just because of the abundance of all damage dealt we have on this build, but it still really synergizes with our build, so of course we're going to get that. We have 3 out of 3 on Hex Machina to allow us to get more fire rate. Fire rate is really good on any build, so that is a given. We can get up to 30%, which is awesome. Next we have Worst Curse. Whenever we apply a dark magic status effect, our spell damage and ability damage is going to increase. The key word is going to be ability damage, which allows our Geist Skulls to deal even more damage. This build does center around dark magic, so I'm not using Amped Up. If you'd like to, you could use Amped Up. Now we do actually have an item on the build that does shock, so I could potentially use points into Amped Up to get our ward back up even quicker, but I feel like it's a bit redundant due to the fact that our next skill is going to be Restore the Veil. I briefly went over the skill, and basically the whole synergy of the build is around Restore the Veil. So every single time we get dark magic healing us, it doesn't heal our HP, it instead heals our ward. We're pretty much going to always get full wards with a combination of Wraith Mail and Restore the Veil. But if you feel like your survivability is a little bit low, you could potentially use Amped Up, but I feel like it's a bit overkill with the gear that we are running and the skill tree and the entire, I guess, kit of the build. But you could, once again, it's a great skill for this type of thing, but I felt like it was unnecessary. Next we have 3 out of 3 on Toxicity. Whenever we apply a poison status effect, we get more crit damage, companion damage, and active skill cooldown rate, which is excellent. Majority of the time this is going to be only occurring due to the fact of Geist Skulls, but you could potentially use a spell to proc it as well. But I felt like Geist Skulls made this skill proc enough where I didn't really need to use anything else. Now, real quick before we continue down to the other tree, you might be wondering what amp shield I'm using, so I'm going to actually go over to my inventory just so you can see the shield and nothing else. So we are using the Visage, or Visage, I'm not sure how to say it, but it's fine. Pretty much this is a really powerful amp shield that basically converts all our damage to frost damage, and that might sound a bit counterintuitive with a bunch of different skills that we currently have, but it still is a force to be reckoned with. This is pretty much one of the best amp shields in the entire game due to the way that it formulates its damage. If you want a good explanation on that, it goes into the whole entirety and deep dive on how the shield works, but I will link it on top right if you guys are interested in a more in-depth explanation. But I will try my best to explain it as we go along this video. Now we got the shield out of the way, you might be wondering why I'm not using Bog Down. Now Bog Down is a great skill. You can potentially use it to deal more frost damage, and the Visage, of course, makes us deal frost damage. So unfortunately, I did not use the Bog Down because I felt like it was too slow. Most of the time, the bosses or enemies would die before Geist Skulls would even proc it. And I even toyed around with using a spell that was poison, but I felt like the spell that we currently have was a lot better for the entire build. And I did even toy around with a Poison Buffmeister just to see if it would proc Bog Down. It does not proc Bog Down, which is a bit surprising because it says dealing non-stats effect poison damage has a chance to create, the soak effect, but Poison Buffmeister doesn't proc it for some reason. Oh. Next, let's go over the Graveborn tree. Now we have 3 out of 3 Unfaithful Thralls with our armor amping up to 6 out of 3. This is just a great all damage dealt tool that you can use on any build. Of course, you want to get 3 out of 3 on any build, but this also synergizes with Spirit Swarm, which allows it to get another stack, as well as, of course, the Graveborn's own tree, giving us more stacks with it by getting Dark Hydra with our armor, amping it up to 5. So we could potentially have our companion, our Spirit Swarm, and 5 Dark Hydras up, which means 7 of these, and 7 times 18 is an easy 126 more all damage dealt, which is awesome. Next, we have Essence Drain, just so we can cast our spells quicker. Next, we have Dark Pact. This is a dark magic type build, so we want to deal the most amount of dark damage, so 5 out of 5 on Dark Pact is obvious. We do have 3 out of 3 on Harvest. You could potentially use these points in the Blightcaller tree, if you so wish, but I felt like the bonus dark magic damage did help our Spirit Swarm to deal a little bit more damage. And if Spirit Swarm is for some reason dealing, like randomly, it will do this 100k damage per hit, Harvest will be 18% more bonus dark magic damage. That's an easy 18k added to the Spirit Swarm, which is awesome, as well as double dipping and a bunch of other stuff. But so it'd be a lot higher, but basically Harvest is really just for Spirit Swarm. Next, let's go over the actual items of the build. Now, primarily, I did like using the Ruby Spite the best on this build, just because it synergizes with a certain amulet that we're using, but you could potentially use a Gyre. I did feel like the Gyre shotgun was really good, as well as Sword Explosion. Obviously, it's really good. And this also was a really nice purple that I found, but you primarily want to use a Ruby Spite or a crossbolt weapon due to the fact that we're using an amulet of Bartolode, which is going to pretty much give us play the angles on a non-Spore Warden build, because what it does is every single time we have a crossbolt added to the enemy, it's going to ricochet any damage applied to the enemy that is attached with a crossbolt and deal damage accordingly. If you deal a large amount of damage with your gun, the Bartolode is going to ricochet that large amount of damage and even double dip it with all damage dealt, so, and a few other things. But that's why the Bartolode is so good. Now, you guys might be wondering, at the beginning of the montage, you saw my build actually proc Ruby Spite on kill effect during the raid bosses without me killing any mobs. And that's because the Bartolode can actually proc the on kill effect. So Bartolode counts as a gun kill, and it counts as the Ruby Spite kill, which is very cool. So that means you could potentially be hitting a boss and get Ruby Spite's increased fire rate and homing effect to proc without even hitting any of the mobs or consciously hitting the mobs, which is awesome. You just focus on the boss and they're done. Now, the enchantment you want on any gun you use, primarily all the guns you use on this build, is Dark Magic. You want to have on action skills start, increase damage dealt by 20% for 20 seconds. Next is going to be a classic Goblin Pickaxe with action skill as active, increase elemental damage by 35%, of course with with Echo as well. This is a Darker Magic Goblin pickaxe, just because when we do decide to actually hit with the pickaxe, we're going to deal more damage with our Dark Magic amps that we have throughout the entire build. Now the spell we're using is going to be a Fortifying Sigil. Now the Fortifying Sigil is a great spell. It's going to heal you 8% of your HP every single second, which allows you to be in Reaper Bones for pretty much the entire duration of the actual sigil, which is awesome. And due to the fact that Essence Drains on Graveborn's tree allows you to get spell cooldown rate, we can get our sigil back before Reaper Bones gets to end most of the time. And of course, it healing us allows us to get some survivability as well as get longer durations of Reaper Bones, if that wasn't obvious. But it also increases our damage dealt inside the sigil by 20%, which is awesome. It has the enchantment while axe skill is active, increased dark magic damage by 50%. So essentially we have axe skill is active stuff, so we want to stay in Reaper Bones as long as possible. So the Fortified Sigil is going to allow that for a long time. And because of that, I felt like Sanguine Sacrament was a bit unnecessary on this build, so I didn't have any points on that, which you guys might be wondering when I was looking at the skill tree why I didn't have that. So that's why I have Fortified Sigil to kind of mitigate the loss of that ability. Also, if you guys aren't aware, the sigil blocks projectiles from the enemies, so you can kind of just stand in your bubble, do the homing stuff with Ruby Spite, as I'll show in a few moments, and just deal tons and tons of damage by just standing still, and they can't really hurt you. And if someone does melee you, it's going to heal you, as well as your ward's going to heal. So you're going to get a lot of survivability and a lot of damage on this build, basically. And even the Barter Load will ricochet that damage to nearby targets, which means you could even hit a target that you weren't even aiming at, which is awesome. Next, let's go over our shield. I did already go over the shield. It deals a lot of damage, basically. If you want the Cliff Notes version, it deals lots and lots of damage with our build and still synergizes with all the stuff that we currently have. But you might be wondering, doesn't it kind of do less for our build than any other shield, due to the fact that this shield cannot get enchantments. I believe this is one of the 2 items in the game at the current moment that is still unable to get enchantments, which is really bizarre. But the build is able to perform really good, and I made builds in the past with items that couldn't get enchantments, and they were fine. This one's fine as well. Once it is able to get enchantments, you probably want to get on spell cast increase gun damage or axe skill star increase gun damage, one of those 2. But at the current moment it can't get it, so you can kind of just get this whenever and just go ham with it, which is very fun. Next is going to be our armor piece, which is the Scarlet Claw. Now the Scarlet Claw, as I said before, does have the 3 Faithful Thralls and 2 Dark Hydras with gun damage, fire rate, and all damage dealt. Now the key part of the build is dealing damage randomly with your companions to buff your damage even further. Now the Scarlet Claw isn't used in a lot of builds unless you're doing a companion based build, and this I wouldn't really call it a companion based build, but we're still able to get a large bonus from the Scarlet Claw, nevertheless, due to Spirit Swarm just going all around the map and the Dark Hydras just pinging enemies, which is awesome. Pretty much, if you guys aren't aware, the Scarlet Claw's ability, when our companions deal dark magic damage, which it's always going to do because all their damage is converted into dark magic damage, they take 20% increased dark magic damage for 6 seconds, which doesn't sound like a lot, but you gotta keep in mind that this is multiplicative on everything else in the damage formula. So gun damage is multiplicative with all damage dealt, basically conditional stuff. Like, this is a huge bonus. It doesn't sound like a lot, 20% does not sound like a lot, but it's like Soak. You know how like Soak is multiplicative with the whole damage tree? The Scarlet Claw is basically the same thing, but it's only 20%. So it's not as high as Soak, but it's a really good bonus. So never downplay this armor piece. It's really good, especially since Spirit Swarm's always out there and going through walls and hitting enemies very easily. Now, if you did want to use a different armor piece, you could use a Mosquito's Mantle. Keep in mind, none of the clips I used on the montage used the Mosquito's Mantle. I did not feel like it was necessary on this build. But once again, since it's not patched yet, if you want to use the Mosquito's Mantle, go for it. I don't personally want to use it because I feel like Scarlet Claw synergizes more with the build and it's more fun that way, but you definitely can use a Mosquito's Mantle if you'd like. Also, since we're talking about the Mosquito's Mantle is not able to proc the Barter Load unless, of course, you already have a crossbolt on the enemy. So you can't use a non-crossbolt gun and still proc the Barter Load by using a Mosquito's Mantle, which I think I said it was able to at one point. I don't remember if I 100% did. Maybe I said it in my Discord. But it's unable to do that. So keep that in mind. If you use a Mosquito's Mantle, it won't proc the Barter Load unless you already have a crossbolt on the enemy. But I digress. That's just a misconception I wanted to clear up. Next, we have 2 Sharkbanes. Now, Sharkbane, I did honestly feel like it was going to get patched. The Sharkbane is an interesting ring. It's the only ring that doubles gun damage. or any of these damage type of things. So pretty much what the Sharkbane does is if you roll gun damage on the Sharkbane, it's going to double the damage. So normally an Ascended Ring with gun damage only has 26.3, I think it is. 26.3, but the Sharkbane doubles it to 52.6. So if you're doing a gun damage build, you can most certainly use a Sharkbane and deal a lot of damage. I did not use a Sharkbane on any of my other builds due to the fact I did feel like it was going to be patched, but there are some theories and some data mining stuff, or just looking at the code, that suggests that this is intentional because the Sharkbane is unable to roll 3 secondary stats. It's only able to roll 2. Some people theorize that potentially that they remove the chance of hitting 3 to just double the gun damage roll. So I mean, that's a theory. It probably is intentional since they haven't patched it. Since they haven't patched it after what, 3 DLCs? Let's just use it. Normally I use a mood ring, but we're not going to patch this item, might as well just use it. So I have 2 identical Sharkbanes, of course. Very easily to do that. If you guys aren't familiar, just put an item into the bank, reload your save, and then grab the item. Then basically you have 2. That's like the Cliff Notes version how to dupe an item, but pretty much it has dark magic efficiency so we can get our wards back quicker, as well as critical hit with pistols to deal even more damage with the Ruby Spite. And finally, let's go over our hero points, which is maxed out strength, maxed out wisdom, and midway into attunement. We need as much help as we can get with skill cooldown because we can get our spells like that because of the Graveborn tree, and Fortified and Sigil is very easy to get back up. But the Reaper Bones does have an atrocious cooldown, so more attunement the better. But I do feel like maxing out wisdom and strength is still the play on this build, especially since wisdom is going to make our stats effect dots deal more damage, and the higher damage our dots, the higher damage Spirit Swarm is going to deal, and then Spirit Swarm of course also gets wisdom stats effect damage, so Spirit Swarm is going to deal some nasty damage with max out wisdom, so might as well get that. And I breezed past it on my last explanation of the Barload, but more Blightcaller power the better. You get increased damage for all elemental attacks with more Blightcaller powers, so you want to get as much as that as possible. So ideally you would want an armor piece with Graveborn and Blightcaller with 1 point into Wraith Mail, which I believe is able to spawn, but only if Blightcaller is primary. I just checked. It is able to spawn. But I digress. Let's actually show the mobbing of the build. Now before we actually go into the actual mobbing, I do want to showcase one important thing on the Ruby Spite. I did make a whole video on this before, but I'll briefly explain it. So the Ruby Spite deals this damage, 365 times 3 in 2 round bursts. Now the only thing that the alt fire does seemingly is to change the zoom, but this is primary, and then the alt fire changes to zoom even farther. Now this increased zoom also comes with 200% more damage on your Ruby Spite. So if you're using a Ruby Spite like I am, always make sure it's in the zoom position because you'll deal 3 times more damage or 2 times more damage. Crazy how much more damage you deal with that. So if you look at the bottom left, you can see my ward is full. Now if I were to go into my kit and proc everything, you'll see that my ward is filling up very, very easily, and you'll see occasionally blue bolts come out of my Ruby Spite, which means that the actual amp shield is going into effect. Now the amp attack does deal a crazy amount of damage. As you can see right here, we're pretty much mowing down all the enemies you see without any problem at all. When the amp shots actually do hit, which is going to affect all 3 bolts that come out of the actual gun, it's going to deal up to like 3 times more damage just because of how nutty the actual ward is. And we cleared the encounter without me really being conscious of anything. I guess Spirit Swarm might have killed some enemies. Pretty much this build is able to deal lots and lots of damage and mobbing very easily like most builds, but it's able to get that nice nifty effect of just randomly killing enemies around the map due to the Barload ricocheting shots, as well as Spirit Swarm dealing some crazy damage along the way. Of course, on any build, you want to activate your burst window as much as possible, and the burst window in question on this build is going to, of course, be our Reaper Bones. So you want to be in Reaper Bones as long as possible, which means that you want to be activating your spell, which is Fortified and Sigiled, as well as picking HP Veils off the floor, which will allow us to potentially get a longer duration for our Reaper Bones. But the Fortified and Sigil, as you see right here, pretty much comes back super duper quickly at all times. So you can kind of just stand in one spot inside the Fortified and Sigil and just kill all the enemies around you, especially since I guess Spirit Swarm killed another enemy there and cleared the run. But you're able to clear all the enemies by just standing still, as I'll showcase in this next room by going into an elite portal. So let me get in a nice little position just so I can showcase the ability of the gun by just standing still. So I'm just going to activate all my skills and stuff, so I'm pretty much just going to stand in one spot and just kill all the enemies that spawn. Now if there's nearby enemies near the target that I actually shot, the barter load is going to deal some crazy damage. Like all the shields off of that enemy was immediately gone without me really even doing anything, just because the barter load dealing some crazy double dipping damage and just some crazy damage in general. But pretty much we're able to kill any enemy that spawns very, very fast, no matter how big their HP bar is, as you guys just saw. A lot of the stuff on the build is pretty automatic. You're going to get, you know, your ward back without even thinking by just shooting. You're going to get the powerful debuffs from the Scarlet Claw to happen without you even thinking, because Dark Hydras hit random enemies, as well as your Spear Swarm hitting random enemies, and potentially even your Deme Lich. And I love these rooms because you can really see how fast we're able to kill enemies with this particular build. If I just stand still right over here as they all spawn, I'm just going to keep shooting and all the enemies are pretty much just going to die without me really moving at all. Even when the boss spawns, we're going to easily kill him as well. It's King Archer and he's dead. This build is a lot of fun. I think it's really, really fun to use a different type of setup than I normally do and kill all the enemies by just pretty much standing still and seeing those nifty little amp shots dealing some ridiculous damage when they occur, which is going to be all the time when mobbing. Now during bossing, you will get the amp shields to proc over and over and over as well, due to the fact that the barter load is going to kill random enemies as you shoot the boss, which means you're going to get your ward full, as well as, of course, proc dark magic damage on nearby targets, since barter load does copy the element of the damage that procced it. So you're going to get dark magic healing for your ward all the time, which is awesome. This build has a ton of survivability just because of how nutty the fortifying sigil is, by blocking projectiles as well as healing you for a long time, as well as having a very low cooldown. And you don't really need to worry about your HP ever running out, due to the fact that you can kind of use Reaper Bones as a nice tool to just restore all your HP, as I'll demonstrate in just a moment. So if you ever feel like your HP is going low, you can go into Reaper Bones and instantly restore all your HP just like that, as well as, of course, the one effect of having invulnerability with Reaper Bones. After you go to 0 HP, you're going to have percentage of your HP come back to you and have some seconds of invulnerability, so you have some extra survivability on this build as well, without sacrificing any damage. So you get the best of both worlds, tons of damage, tons of survivability. Forgot to mention, if you did want to, you could potentially use a Buffmeister, of course, on this build. If you did use a Buffmeister, which I am opting out of doing this time, you want a Dark Magic Buffmeister with Ka-Chow and Pew for ability damage, fire rate, and stuff like that. But the build doesn't really need a Buffmeister. Most builds don't honestly need a Buffmeister. I just like to see how much damage we can get with a Buffmeister. But I decided to be a little bit different today and try out the Fortified Sigil, which is one of the best purple spells in the entire game, in my honest opinion. And as always, a big shout out to the members who make these videos possible. We got Clairvoyance, Rick Iglesias, Grey Wolf, Cameron, Witchkeeper, and 31 Bar 70. These are the people who support me as little as $5 a month, and you can also support me as little as $5 a month by clicking a link in the comments description or on the top right to become a member on YouTube or Patreon. The more members we have, the closer I get to becoming full-time, which means more videos for you guys. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I hope you all have a great day. Bye-bye.
And the last shall be first to immerse in a pass out heat, facing him out with a moxie melt till he woke up drowning in tchotchke hell. War in a cave with a torch on a wall, then a window arrangement of porcelain dolls.